Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is George Phillips. I am the manager at the Glen P. Sutherland Gallery of Art, and welcome to tonight's virtual artist tour. Before we start, we always like to make sure we begin with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the Brandon University and the Sutherland Gallery are both located on Treaty 2 territory. We respect the treaties that were made on these lands, and on behalf of Brandon University, we welcome you to the traditional homelands of the Dakota, Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Métis peoples. Tonight, we have a virtual tour with Nicole. The tour is on her thesis exhibition, A Chronic Invisibility. The show was made as part of Nicole's degree as a BFA honors student with a major in ceramics. And the show is honestly a wonderful little collection that we were actually truly proud to have on display at the Sutherland currently. So without further ado, Nikki, take it away.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So my name is Nicole Brasseur. Everybody calls me Nikki. I am a BFA honors student at Brandon University, and this is my 5th and final year in the program. However, I think I've been an artist for most of my life, more of a collector and builder of sorts, if you will. I have always used art, I suppose, in one way or another as kind of like an outlet, because I was never able to really verbalize a lot of things that I struggled through. And one experience in particular was actually pain. I suppose I've always known and have been known as this kind of like person that has kind of got through everything, and people saw me as this like warrior, you know, oh, she's so strong, she's been through this, she's been through that. Meanwhile, I was like very literally crumbling inside, physically and psychologically. And so one of the things I registered through conversations with others and understanding my own experiences is that people that live with chronic pain tend to do so in silence. So over the past couple of years, especially recently, however, I went through quite a lot of experiences with extreme physical pain, and it got to a point that I could no longer like that quote unquote push through. It made me really notice not only how difficult it can be to explain to people what this experience is like, but how little I had given myself opportunity to actually breathe it all in. And so when going through the initial stages of researching and making for this thesis exhibition, I found myself struggling and not able to fully register what I needed to say. I created a piece of art at night out of pure frustration with myself. And I was going through a lot of pain, and it was like going back and forth, and I couldn't really sleep or whatever. And so it was this piece of art that kind of became the foundation for exploring this way of making. And this single piece essentially articulated everything I needed to say and opened doors to bigger conversations that I wasn't aware needed to be had. So I'm going to just share my screen here. And okay. I'm just gonna stop my video just so the internet, in case there's issues, forgive me. Okay, so just a heads up for anybody going forward. This is a bit of a trigger warning. There are depictions and interpretation of bandaged wounds in this presentation and in the exhibition, specifically related to gauze and plaster cast bandages. So I wanted to kind of start off this presentation reading an excerpt from my statement. I have lived so much of my life in pain that it has become a companion. This statement not only illustrates how insidiously pain can enter one's life, but how it becomes normalized over time. For chronic pain sufferers, the need to articulate suffering is not solely restricted to narratives of medical intervention, but rather an urgency to communicate in a way that makes one feel seen and heard. Art that speaks to a bigger narrative is something I am passionate about. However, it is arduous to be the one that does the speaking. Therefore, confronting these corporal experiences was fundamental in cultivating this thesis exhibition. A chronic invisibility channels my experiences with this disability in a way that expresses the sentiment without needing language to defend it. This gallery is a representation of the internal or habitual spaces I have been forced into or chose to exist in. The work is a representation of the physical and psychological dis-ease that accompanies my chronic pain. And by unveiling these experiences, I am hoping to make space for others in the disability community who struggle to feel visible. I really wanted to focus on specific accessibility sides of art and how others in the disability community may process the experience of art. And so it was for this reason that I chose to employ new methods of translation and ways to experience the work. The whole of the thesis is comprised of a sans-serif font. Braille has been made available for the title wall, statement, and artwork labels. QR codes are displayed on the title wall and thesis statement, and when scanned, there is an audio option for each. QR codes are also next to each artwork and provide auditory identifications of the work. Also, I will be offering guided tours and touch tours to individuals that have low vision or are blind. Through the presentation and opening of the show, we're doing a small reception. I will also be wearing a window mask for those who require the visual of reading lips. I created a map for this exhibition as well. Some of the label panels that depict Braille and QR codes are not directly next to the work. This map identifies each work in the gallery, the location of these panels, as well as the location of the seating, coat rack, and restrooms. When you first walk in and turn to your right, you notice the title wall and statement. Both have their associated QR codes that provide the audio option and the Braille option. The statement has been made into a bound Braille book as well. As you walk towards your left, you will approach 3 large-scale works made of plaster. Another excerpt from my statement reads, "Material manipulation is pivotal to my working process. Although I live with chronic pain, my body is never stagnant. Physically manipulating raw materials in an intuitive way is imperative for me, and I seldomly work from a sketch, so my response is intrinsic rather than methodic. This extension of materiality imparts aspects of my physical and emotional state into the work and allows me to communicate through my work." It was for this reason that I chose plaster to express the psychological effects of chronic pain, the tension and the emotion. Plaster requires observation and patience. It is only pliable for a short time until it becomes rigid. Building layers, smashing pieces, and haphazardly carving into these works gave me the freedom of nonverbal expression. These large hanging works represent the psychological tension that comes with chronic pain. Each are constructed from a rectangular frame and hung vertically off the wall and continuously gain in size and depth. The 3 works are titled "The Calm That Wavers," "Just Before, Just After," and "The Storm That Surges." The first of this series, "The Calm That Wavers." When you stand in front of this piece, it is shoulder width. There is a lot of texture in the work, and it lacks color other than having been slightly stained in areas by coffee. This work was the first piece I made for this exhibition, and it was by accident. I was frustrated, dealing with a lot of pain, unable to process it, and I needed to tear my hands through something. while there are smooth and fluid sections made by pressing my palms into the surface, there is a tension that exists with the rougher and more rigid spaces. This work identifies the beginning moments of a pain cycle, the ebb and flow of attempts to be calm and collected while struggling. This is the second of the three pieces, and it is titled Just Before, Just After. The title is a reference to the psychological spaces that I exist in just before I lose control of the pain or coming down from just having lost it. This piece is larger in scale and physical presence than the first. The plaster in this work is heavier, and there are pieces that appear to have either been accumulated or are being dispersed. These pieces form rigid mounds around the work, and the surface texture has more grit to it. The staining of the plaster with coffee is more prominent in this work, creating visual depth as well. As you walk ahead, you will approach the third and final piece of this series. The title of this work is A Storm That Surges. It is the largest in scale, standing over 6.5 feet tall, 3 feet wide, and weighing in at roughly 160 pounds. The plaster around the edges is smooth and has been manipulated with my palms. There are scratch marks that have been made into the surface, and fingers have clawed and dragged the plaster toward the center, forming a large mound of shards and pieces. This piece is representative of what it is to live in consistent pain, the extreme physical tension, the ups and downs, the hopelessness. While this piece is the last work in the series, the three together symbolize a pendulum of experience. Living with chronic pain means you're constantly living at the pivot point of the pendulum, the just before and just after. Some days it may tilt further into the storm or into the calm. As you turn to the left, you encounter this work. The burden is heavy, unsoiled is the veil. This work consists of a rusted iron bed frame. Around the rails of the frame, wire has been woven to create a distorted and weakened platform. This platform is bearing the weight of a mound of sullied plastered shards. They are stained with coffee, and although there are sharp edges, they form the curvilinear outline of a body on the bed, symbolic of the depressive side of pain. The entire bed is shrouded by a very large veil which drapes from above. The veil is clean and represents my external facade, what person I present to the world. I have put on this mask for years that everything is fine, and it has only been recently that I have started letting people see the other side of me. The veil has varying degrees of transparency to it because I am beginning to reveal parts of myself. It also appears to be patched because while I am starting to become more visible, there are still parts of me that struggle with that vulnerability and fight to stay shrouded. Next to the bed hang three pieces which help create a room-like experience. This work is titled The Enigma, Pain, Body, Mind, and Spirit. This trio of 9-inch rhombus-shaped pieces are lined up on a wall vertically and are hung by antique brass hangers. Protruding out of them are grotesque wounds contained by gauze. There is somewhat of a religious symbolism in these works, as well as making a nod to the Christian Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and how similar wooden plaques with Christian quotes would be displayed in homes. There is an air of silence that comes from a Christian upbringing, one in which I have experienced. This rhetoric of silence is relatable in many ways to the silence experienced from chronic pain. When you begin to speak of these experiences, there is a stigma. You are met with disbelief, unsolicited advice or judgment, comparison, or overt compassion, forgive me. This is why these have been hung in a space that reads like a bedroom, because the enigma is that my pain, body, mind, and spirit is difficult to understand and has been historically easier to cope with when contained to my own self-judgment in the spaces I have felt most comfortable. As you continue around the gallery, you are met with an alcove containing 5 pieces. This work is called Unveiling the Battle, the 5 Stages of Grief: denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, or depression and acceptance. This installation is made up of 5 slender pieces, 1 for each of the stages. Each piece is made of hinged planks of wood that have been positioned to appear like figures in the various stages. Denial, anger, bargaining, and depression are placed behind the central figurative piece of acceptance, which stands 8 feet tall. These 5 works house plaster pieces that have been contained by plaster cast bandages and strips of stained fabric. Each of the various stages appear endured because grief and the process of dealing with grief can be painful. As it relates to chronic pain, these are the emotions I generally process weekly, sometimes even daily. They cycle, but it takes a lot some days to concede to the pain and accept that this is in fact my experience. Though the piece symbolizing acceptance appears steadfast and at the forefront, it is always loomed over by the other sentiments. These works are on the opposite wall of the series of 3, acting like both sides of the chronic pain spectrum. The tension can cause emotional stages, and these stages can consequently cause physical and psychological tension. As you continue from this wall, you are met with a piece titled "The Need for Relief Can Become the Disease." This piece is made up of a wooden medicine cabinet that hangs on the wall. There are 2 wooden doors which are open, but no mirror. On top of the medicine cabinet, as well as the 3 shelves inside, are multiple glass medicinal and liquor bottles. Certain bottles have brown liquid inside them that appears almost putrid, while others are empty or knocked over and have dried residue that has leaked on the floor. There are places in which it is obvious that bottles have existed, but now there is only a ring of dust showing that they have been used. This work is a commentary on the act of medicating for relief and how sometimes the desperation to feel anything but pain, especially after experiencing years of it, can cause you to become reliant on whatever you get your hands on. The final work in this exhibition is a central figurative piece titled "It Drags Me Back, I Carry It With Me." "It Drags Me Back, I Carry It With Me" is the only piece in the exhibition with a capital in its title, giving agency to the self that persists. The main portion of this work is made up of strips of fabric symbolizing the person I am today, who has begun to shred the veil. It stands 6.5 feet tall and is hung from the ceiling via a fishing line. The strips are pieced together and appear to outline the human form. Much of the fabric is lacking color, yet some of the ends are stained with coffee. The strips extend behind the figure and are enmeshed into 2 separate mounds of plaster shards. These shards reference the pieces from the bed and both the psychological and emotional tension that accompanies pain. While each of these mounds is on a platform, it is uncertain if the figure is being dragged back or has found a way to move forward and carry the weight of it all. A shadow exists on the floor in front of the figure as a metaphorical foreshadowing that I have in fact opened the doors and have finally found a way to identify and outwardly exist as a person with a disability. I just want to put on my thing or my video for this part. So I just wanted to say a special thank you to the MAC Council, the Manitoba Arts Council. I was gifted an opportunity with their recognized scholarship, and it helped me greatly in the process of making this exhibition. To my thesis committee, Lisa Wood, Kevin McKenzie, and Lynn Ju, I am utterly grateful for your advice, your experience, and knowledge in the process of this past year. To my parents, because they have been my sounding stone through all the appointments and the drama that has been the last couple years of my life. To George Phillips, he has been immensely helpful over the past while, especially in the last couple of days with our exhibition installations. It's been an honor working with you. To Faith Ray, who has been my trusty sidekick downstairs in the Glen P Sutherland studio basement. I don't know if this year would have been as successful if I didn't have an opportunity to have conversations with you and bounce ideas off of you and rant with you. So thank you very much. To the SAS crew, Michelle Magnuson and Morgana Melian for helping me through some of the accessibility portions of this exhibit, specifically the Braille. Without it, it wouldn't have been what I needed for this exhibit. And specifically to Morgana, you know, we've been through it all. So thank you for walking this path with me. Yeah. The end.
Well, thank you, Nikki. That was lovely. And I assure you it was an absolute pleasure to work with you for the last few days. So thank you for that.
Yay.
All right, so we're into the question and answers portion of the artist talk. If anybody has a question that they do not want to say out loud, feel free to type it into the chat. Otherwise, is there anybody who would like to go ahead? Perhaps while people are just organizing their thoughts, I did have a question about in terms of you doing the Braille and the QR codes and all the work you have done to try to make this show as accommodating as you can. I was wondering if you could talk about the process of that, if there has been any issues or if there's been any challenges in implementing those things that you thought was worthy of notice.
Honestly, I think it was just like, it was all a new experience for me. So understanding, I had to do my own research. So understanding how QR codes are processed, the way that I could access QR codes and upload information to them was a new experience for me. I was lucky that the SAS department allowed me to use a voice recorder, which was, it had a USB. So I was able to record a lot of my, I guess, script for the audio depictions, which made it really helpful. Although it's like something to point out that having to speak and have it be perfect is quite difficult. So that's something that I learned in the process of doing it. But, and the Braille, yeah, it was through a system in the SAS office called Duxbury. So it was quite, once it like was involved, it took some time, but it was definitely well worth it. The whole process of everything was well worth it. Because I think that was the point of doing the extra work was because I wanted to make not only myself feel visible, but have other people feel visible as well.
Thank you. Melanie also asked a question in the chat of how did you decide to use plaster as one of the main materials?
So it was kind of a fluke, honestly. Plaster is like something that I've been wanting to work with for ages. And I think that while doing ceramics, we got to learn how to make like plaster molds. And I noticed very quickly that there's this really interesting chemical reaction that happens where it heats up and it's very like it's pliable for a very short period of time. And then it like solidifies. And I thought it was kind of metaphorically relatable to the experience of like my body. So it transitions, like I'm very fluid if I'm going through like a good week. And then sometimes I'll go through systemic inflammation, and then slowly my body starts to like become rigid. And so that was something that I thought it was great, like quite an easy metaphor for me to relate to. And there is such a short period of time in which you have to kind of work with it. So I appreciated the fact that it was very, what I was thinking and feeling at the time almost became enmeshed into the plaster before it solidified. And I thought that that was really beautiful.
If anybody else has a question, feel free to unmic and interrupt me. But out of curiosity, just coming off the last question as well, what about the coffee? How did you come to decide on that material?
So coffee, coffee is kind of an interesting thing. I noticed that a lot of people that struggle with physical or psychological issues tend to drink a lot of coffee. And this is just from having conversations with friends, family members, other students. And so coffee is a really interesting medium because it is very fluid as well, but it also becomes quite viscous if left over time, almost like, lack of a better word, blood. And blood is kind of like a life source for us, right? So I thought it was really funny that coffee is kind of like a life source for dealing with chronic pain. And so it represents a lot of the emotional drainage, if you will. The more coffee you drink, the more emotionally and physically drained I am.
Oh, I believe somebody raised their hand. So yeah, Jimmy, you can go ahead and ask if you wish.
Thanks for that super personal and wonderful presentation. That was really nice. So I guess I have two questions. One is, and I hope that I didn't miss this already, but I'm just thinking about you, like all of the steps that you've taken to make this work accessible to as many people as possible. And I think that's really admirable, and it seems like it's part of the work. It's not just something that makes the work accessible in some ways to me, So I'm wondering, so the first question is, did you know that you were going to go to all of those great lengths while you were making the work? That's question number one. And then question number two is, and I'm sort of hoping that the answer to question number one makes question number two relevant. Has taken all of this, like all the effort that you've made, all of the effort that you have put into making the work accessible. I'm gonna turn on my camera. It's weird to just be a black box. See, I'm the person talking. Look at me. Okay. Do you think that will change the way that you're going to make work in the future? Like so much of your work is so tactile, and like the first piece that you showed, like, I think if I was faced with that, I would want to touch it. Some people might want to lick it even because of the coffee. I don't know. So I'm just wondering, when you're making I was just wondering if you could, yeah, talk about if you knew you were gonna make the QR codes and not the Morse code, the
Braille.
Braille and all this sort of accessibility stuff while you were making the work, and if you think that all of that journey of like putting all of those pieces into place will affect the way that you'll make artistic decisions in the future. Sorry for being so long-winded.
No, that's okay. So I didn't know that I was going to be doing the QR codes in the Braille. It was actually probably within the last like 3 months or so that like the past year has been really difficult for me physically, and I started doing some research on my own about like accessibility legislation and stuff like that in Manitoba as far as galleries were concerned and other institutional settings. And I realized that there isn't really a lot mandated for gallery settings. So I noticed too, like even just my own accessibility being challenged in certain ways over the course of especially the last like 3 or 4 months. And it just kind of made me want to push a little bit further, because if I was trying to be a voice not only for myself but potentially other people, that I had to be more of an advocate in other areas outside of my own experience. So I figured looking at works in galleries could be a lot more accommodating to a wider community of people, specifically those that are like in the disability community, where a lot of people have been kind of put to the wayside as far as experiencing art. And I feel like that aspect of culture should really be honored in every possible way. So yeah, I didn't know that I was going to be doing the QR codes or the Braille at first. I had the idea of Braille initially, and then when I started thinking about like doing touch tours, the idea behind touch tours is amazing, but I think having that sort of auditory depiction of work outside of what people like seeing people would experience, I think having that personal touch of being able to kind of feel emotionally what somebody is going through while seeing a piece of artwork is very important. So I wanted to introduce that aspect, and QR codes seemed like, especially after the pandemic, like the perfect way to introduce that kind of technology. So yeah, and then would I change aspects of my artwork going forward? Definitely. I'm not physically capable of producing artwork the way that I used to, and I know that, and I'm very stubborn. So it's very hard for me to kind of let go of that side of my artistic life. But I feel like I've had conversations with people about the research and the academia side of this sort of field. And I feel like there are other avenues that maybe I could work with people in the community and people could create art with me, as opposed to me creating everything for people to see. I feel like having the opportunity for people to speak their own voice, even though they are doing that through an object or an item, might be a very intuitive way to go.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
No problem. Yes, the studio did always smell like coffee, Faith.
Were you going to read those questions, George, I wonder?
Yep, Maria was asking, they know that you are passionate about so many issues, and they were curious to know if there was a triggering factor that caused you to pull back the veil, revealing your own pain and struggle.
That's a tough one to answer. And the initial ideas that I had for doing my thesis were quite they had been relatable to trauma. And so when I started kind of processing those pieces of my like history, I realized that even then, that kind of making work, it wasn't something that I was necessarily passionate about. So I had created an entire cabinet of these pieces, and I just couldn't get into the making aspect of it. And then one day I was just so frustrated and started making something completely different and stopped reading and researching. And then all of a sudden something just kind of happened. And so I feel like there was partially something that kind of got triggered within me that, and I definitely see a change in myself even from September until now. Like there's like more of a confidence in speaking about the artwork. There's more of like an understanding of where it comes from and why I've made it. And so I feel like it was probably just meant to be in a way, even if it was really difficult to process. But yeah.
Melanie was asking about the QR codes, if they're going to be made accessible online outside of the exhibition.
I'm hoping so. That is something that I have to talk to the communications department about. I have them all available. So it would, I don't know what the technology is as far as our website is concerned, but I'm hoping they can be. But that is something that I'm going to have to talk to them about. They do work, like if I scan one through my computer, they do work. So I'm assuming it should be okay, but yeah.
Were there any other comments, questions, or anything else that anybody wants to bring up?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yep, I
Yes.
can hear you, Liz.
I can. I change devices every talk, and I never know. I have to run and plug in my headphones. So I'm just really struck by this iconography of the bed in the middle of all of these. Like I keep thinking that what you're describing is this kind of yearning for comfort and safety, because the central piece must be this bed. And then you have these figures and these kind of walls that are being formed around you. So the question is, the bed frame, where was it sourced from? Was it a coincidence that you found this bed frame at a moment when you were trying to talk about interior space?
I am quite a scavenger, if you will, of things, and I like a collector, I guess. I'm not really sure what you would call it. Faith can attest to what my studio downstairs looks like. I have so much stuff down there, but I have this habit of going to little antique, I guess, places on roadsides and whatnot. And I had a feeling that, I don't know if it was like some sort of intuitive sense, that I was going to be needing like something that was representational of a bed for this thesis. And I found this piece at some little antique side road place, and they had so many of them that were all lined up, and it was just like such an interesting experience, almost like a catalog of history going through all of these pieces. And I tend to make work based upon things that I have found, just because I find, especially like for me, it is really hard for me to kind of start from scratch. So I tend to source things that have personal histories of their own, whatever those histories may be. And so this bed kind of became this sort of central piece, specifically because like so much of my time is spent like in my bed, or like dealing with like the emotions or the drainage, or like, and I feel like that's like a lot of people that deal with depression. There is such like an iconography of beds, even in the art world, and that emotional side of trauma, essentially. So I wanted to explore ways in which I could walk away from the bed and leave the bedroom, so to speak. So kind of opening the door to that central figurative piece. I think the two really interact with each other, this kind of walking away and moving forward. So yeah, the bed was definitely very important to the whole of the exhibition. And I think probably I knew that was the one item that I knew was going to be in it from the beginning. I just didn't know how. And then it kind of fell into place when the plaster started to like literally fall to pieces on the floor. And I saw all of these like shards and forming these sort of figurative arrangements around me and making a mess. And yeah, it definitely has become a bit of, I think in a lot of my work, that sort of icon of the bed has become very familiar. So
Thank you very much. I'm nodding, but I'm leaving my camera off.
okay.
Thank you, Lucy. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Well, if nobody else does, feel free to interrupt me if you do. But Nikki, is there any way that these people who want to see the exhibition in person can come down and see it?
Yes, I am actually going to type my, oops, my email in the chat here. I think this is right. Yes, so if anybody's interested in making an appointment, it is a closed exhibit, so you have to make an appointment in order to come. And you do also need to be vaccinated and wear a mask in a building, but you are welcome to email me at any point, and yeah, we can set up a time and place. It's on until the 27th. So yeah, if you're interested, be my guest.
Thank you so much, Nikki.
Thank you, Lucy.
Maria says, thank you inside of the chat for your vulnerability and the inclusivity of the work.
Thank you, Maria.
Well, if there's no more questions for tonight, is there anything else you want to say or have done, Nikki, before we close off for the night?
No, I just want to thank everybody for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Nikki, for coming up tonight and speaking to all of us. And thank you, everybody joining us from home for joining our meeting. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thanks, Kevin.
See you tomorrow.
See you.